Hey everyone, welcome to the Passionately Wrong podcast. My name is Randy and I'm here with my friend James, and we're going to continue where we left off last week with my friend Jeff Tiegs and talk about his new book.
Yeah, we've had an interesting discussion so far with the first part, as you've already heard, about the work that Jeff's been doing since he left the military, but things that he learned over the course of his time, pretty much all along from childhood on, that had found their way to the book that he wrote. And today we're going to discuss in some detail what his lessons were from that. So happy listening.
Yeah, and someone say there's more to the story.
I understand how the compelling story that you described is compelling to the law enforcement people that you are working with. Is that the same approach you are taking in the book? I guess there's some different compelling stories that you're telling there. What's the message that you're bringing across to people, just average people who are not involved in this, but whom you are trying to reach? And
Yeah,
what's the story or stories that you want to be telling there? I guess it's these broader themes of being guided by higher morality and higher powers, or tell me what it's
yeah,
about.
there's very little about trafficking in the book itself.
Okay.
The and this is one of the things that Randy helped me with a lot is who is it that you're writing to? Did you have something, Randy?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk, give a kind of an introduction to the book about how
Okay.
we got together on it. Because when I contacted him about the human trafficking, the connection between the book and human trafficking is it brought us together, the human trafficking, not in a seedy way, but in the combating of it. But, and then I was telling him what I was doing. He's like, hey, I've been working, I don't know how long you've been working on it until you brought it to me. Was that 5 years, couple of years or
Yeah,
what?
a couple of years, I don't remember.
Yeah. So he said, hey, can you look at this? And so I looked at it. It was pretty raw because he didn't have any focus. And that's one thing I'm going to pitch myself here or other editors.
Yeah.
Yeah. If a lot of people just have a lot of stuff in their head and they want to get out. And I read through it and it's a combination of religious and combat military stories and things like that. And I was like, man, we got it. I think you might have a couple books here. We got to figure out what the focus of the book is and who you're writing to. And we got to really buckle down on this. And we worked on it. I think I looked through it like 4 times. We moved stuff around and we really tried to get there. I think you did a great job at the end. So I'll let you take it from there. But it takes a village. There's a lot of people that were involved trying to get this in the right place. And he knew a lot of people who had written books before that he had to look at it to give some advice. And we talked about it and it changed at least 6 times, I think.
At least. James, I like how you tied this together with compelling story because I've been a believer my whole life. Like I was born and raised in the church. It's always been like a fact. God exists. He sent his son to die for us. All these kinds of things. And I think sometimes too much in religion, we think that's compelling enough, right? You're a sinner. You need a savior and God sent his son to save you. Is that not compelling enough? For most of us, it isn't, not in our journeys. And you have the Bible itself. And the Bible is a fascinating book, but it's complicated. And it takes you have to read it and reread it and tie all these things together. And I had an opportunity to work and live in Israel. So not only was I able to take these stories from this book that I'd been reading all my life, but I was able to walk the ground. And walking the ground and seeing it come to life it makes it more of a compelling story. And then really searching for these different ties that I hadn't known before. I think the Bible as a story, it is the most complex, fascinating, interwoven story that you can find. It spans thousands of years, all these different characters, the themes run throughout it. And throughout that book, there's all these little clues. So just like when we were talking about the counter trafficking thing, we're looking for clues. We're looking for things that are out of place or why is this in the Bible? Why does God share this one thing with us? It doesn't make any sense. What's he trying to tell us? I think I have the luxury of almost 50 years behind me of being a believer where I'm not struggling with, is this true? Is this real? I'm struggling with, there's got to be more. There's got to be more. And I think if we can find more, it'll be even more compelling to people. And that's what I was able to find through walking the land in Israel and digging through and tying through these stories and doing the research. And that's what it started at, was almost like a personal journey of just how to suss out these other fascinating aspects of this faith that kind of ebbed and flowed and I took for granted. And then when Randy came in, I was beginning to experiment with, hey, not just those faith stories, but how did I live those out? How did those impact my life? And I think that's where we came in together, where I had these two things of, this is my faith story and some fascinating things that have kept me going through the years. And then here are my stories. And what I worked on since I met Randy was really integrating those. So when you get a chance to see the book, it starts with a fairly commonly known Bible story. If you're not a Bible guy, you may not know the stories, but even like David and Goliath, right? People know about David and Goliath. People know about Moses. That most people know these things, or the character of Jesus and all these types of things. If you know some of these stories, there's a richness and a traditions that have been lost to time, either through and a lot of this is through our divisiveness. So when we separated ourselves from Judaism, we left behind all these legends and traditions and all of the other aspects that had bled into Judaism. And then even when you have Catholicism and Protestantism, when they split, we left behind these thousands of years of Catholic tradition and thought and stories. So we keep fragmenting ourselves. And then even as, I guess it's all Protestants, I don't even know how to, now you're a Baptist, I'm an Episcopalian, I'm a this, I'm a Methodist. Like we throw all these things out and we just are happy with just this little sliver. And because I don't feel beholden to any of that, able to take a look back and say, what are some of the old traditions in Judaism that have been lost to time? What are some of the old legends and myths? And if you've ever read guys like Joseph Campbell or even C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, who all look at myth and story and truth and these capital T truths and these small t truths and all of these things that come together, I just found it fascinating. And it's one of the things that I was able to continually anchor myself in through the wars. And I was able to really identify with Old Testament stuff. When I was overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, I found myself reading a lot of Old Testament because it just seemed appropriate. Like it was what we were living in. We were living in like an Old Testament kind of, era. And then I'd come to the United States and with what we have here and the modernism and the security and all of that. And then I would read New Testament. I was finding myself jumping back and forth and really looking for these stories that pointed the Old Testament to the New and back. And I don't even know if I mentioned this in the book, but James, one of the very first things that this was years ago, that was groundbreaking for me is even this idea that we call it the Old Testament and the New Testament, when really it should be called the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Like just that slight change in translation to me is groundbreaking. Because what does testament mean? Testament means here's the story, here's the old story, here's the new story. But when you think of it as a covenant of the old promise, here's the old promise and here's the new promise, the old covenant and the new covenant. Like you now see these two things point back and forth to each other. So even that simple translation of that word impacts the way you would look at this from faith. So everything that Jesus, again, Yeshua, his name was Yeshua, we call him Jesus, Yeshua, which means Savior, the promised one, even his name alone is pointing back to something, to a promise that what he did in his life was fulfilled all of this old covenant requirements. He fulfilled all those things. And now he's creating a new covenant for us to partake in. So there's just all of these things that to me, it just becomes more and more compelling. Are you a Bible guy? Are you familiar with the stories?
I studied the Bible when I was younger and I kept on studying it through college, but since then, not so much. I have a big Hawken binder actually right next to my desk here with a printout of the whole thing. I had intended to do some stories. I use it as material for writing some stories. I started with philosophy first and I got sidetracked for the past couple of years. So I've been reading the Stoics and I was impressed, I have to say, when you were talking about the richness of what was created thousands of years ago, what was recorded and written, and what people understood about humanity and about how life worked and how people related to one another. I was starting to see many similarities between Buddhism and Confucianism and Stoicism. And I have a very strong suspicion that I'm going to see similar themes echoed if I pick up the Bible again and read it and get into basic questions of human nature and how people get along with each other or not, and the struggles that we all have to find what's valuable and good. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question. For a while, It's on my list.
Yeah.
I do know
Yeah.
the stories, but hearing you describe them, it also makes me realize that you're able to make connections and see things by virtue of having had, in effect, the last 5 decades of not conscious study or purposeful study, but it's been back there working around in your head
Yeah.
and find yourself in different settings and somehow gives you a new perspective on these things that you've been reading and listening
Yeah.
and hearing,
Yeah.
which I can definitely relate to and appreciate. That sort of, some things really do only come with experience. You think you know everything when you're 18, right? You really do.
Yeah.
And you're powerful and you're strong and you're learning and you're doing this great stuff. And of course, we're all biased now in our 50s, right? We've done a lot and we think we've learned from our experience, but I honestly do believe there's something to be said for reflecting on what your experience has brought you. So,
Yeah.
who do the heroes in your title refer to? Are you talking about old heroes or new heroes?
Good question. And that's one of those things. So yeah, so with Randy and Randy, I met with Ryan the other day, yesterday, and we were talking about this. And what I was trying to tell Ryan and what Randy told me in the writing process is you don't have to figure it all out. Have your structure and just begin writing, and it begins to reveal itself to you. So the title of my book for years was There's Always More to the Story. It was a bit of a throwback to Paul Harvey. Remember Paul Harvey? Now you know the rest of the story. Good day. Do you remember that at all, James? Yeah.
No, you didn't. Yeah, I don't know. It was on our almost all the international radio stations that played American music. They do it every Sunday, and it was called The Rest of the Story. And he would tell this really compelling story where you're like, what's going to happen next? And it would always have a twist ending. And you know people in it. There would be famous people and they just had these, they were as about their childhood or how before they became famous. It was really great.
So I was finding stuff like that in the Bible where it's like, oh, wait a minute, what? So that was the title for a long time. And then as I began to integrate my own stories into it and like how so the bottom answer is all of the above for you. So the choices you gave me, you forgot the E, all of the above. So these heroes from the Bible, like and one of the guys, what starts the book, and he's in there 5-6 chapters, is David. Because in your journey as a believer, you continually feel unworthy, right? Because we just keep screwing up. And I want to do better, and I love God, you know what I mean? And then you have these dominations of if you can't love God if you're doing this or that. But I was like, you know what? When I looked at David, and I'm like, look, David was impressive in many ways, but what that guy did was terrible. I mean, he had sex with one of his best friend's wife, knowing she was his best friend's wife, one of his mighty men, one of his commanders. He had sex with her and got her pregnant. So to cover that up, okay, that's plenty of guys have done that, right? Plenty of guys have had affairs, okay? It's fucked up, but it's not uncommon, okay? So then he decides to cover it up. So he calls back Uriah and he says, hey, Uriah, great job. Hey, man, spend the night at home, enjoy yourself, because he's trying to cover up that Bathsheba has David's baby. Well, Uriah, the honorable man, says, man, I can't go and sleep with my wife when my men are still in battle over in Amman, Jordan. So he's in Jerusalem. His men are fighting in Amman. I can't do it. I'm going to sleep on the porch. David's like, yeah, that didn't work. Okay, so David's conniving. All right, I'm going to get Uriah drunk. He gets Uriah drunk, sends him back home. No, Uriah still doesn't sleep with his wife. So up until now, there's a couple of dick moves, but still reasonable, right? Like we're all still within the line of kind of, hey, this isn't so bad. Well, his next step is, hey, Abner, I want you to send Uriah up into the fierceness of the fighting. And then right at the pivotal point, I want you guys to pull back and make sure that he gets murdered. What? So now he's covering up for his infidelity by murdering one of his best friends, by murdering one of his greatest commanders. So this is the story that a lot of people know, right? And as I wrote this story, I probably wrote it 4, 5, 6 times. And then, James, it wasn't until the 7th or 8th time I'm editing it, there's one more level of dick that David went to. Not only did he have Uriah murdered, he then brings Bathsheba into his house, because the old Jewish law was when a woman was widowed, the best friend or the brother is supposed to bring her into their house and take care of her. Not only did he have Uriah murdered, he brings Bathsheba into his house. He's going to pretend her child is Uriah's. And everyone is going to applaud David for being such a noble, wonderful man, for being so selfless and taking care of his best friend's widow. So it was just like layer after layer of just dick move. While David is my hero in many of what he was able to do as a small unit leader, the way he related to his men, killing giants, a king that established a dynasty, he's also a hero to me because I don't know about you, James, I've never done anything that bad. You know what I mean? I never have done anything that bad. And God willing, I will go to my grave without ever having murdered one of my best friends to cover up an adulterous affair that I had with his wife. So if God can call David through and through in the Bible, a man after his own heart, if God can have this special relationship with this guy, David, who did one of the most despicable things I've ever heard of, I think I'm okay. I think I am worthy to be in that same box. So that's the dichotomy that we've seen back and forth. Even the disciples, all of these disciples, that they were just such knuckleheads, man. You know what I mean? They did such knucklehead things, and yet they were close friends with Jesus. And there's just story after story through the Old Testament, New Testament that I think is just fascinating, has been lost to time. And it's my honor and pleasure to be able to share those with people that just haven't had the time to dig into it.
One of the things that Jeff hasn't talked about, James, is the half of the book is about his military career and his association with different stories and things that happened to his military and the stories of the people in the Bible. And when he first came to me with that, I was like, I think these are two separate books. And he's like, no, I want to, he almost believed me. No, I wanted, I think I can do this. And then he went back to the drawing board, came back. And then at that time I was working with Laura, who we just interviewed earlier today, Jeff, about something else. She's homeschooling her kids and she wanted to, we had a really good conversation about that. But Laura came in and we went back through it and we're like, some of this works and some of this doesn't. Some of the stories seem really random and not connected. And then he went back to the drawing board and really dug in to find the stories of his life that really connected with the Bible stories. So it's, once again, just like he said, it's layers on layers and layers. He starts out with the start of a military story that kind of draws you in. You're like, oh, wow, where's this going? And then he flips it in to a Bible story that seems unrelated. And then he tells you the rest of this Bible story that you may not know, the story you read in the Bible. But if you didn't do further research or you didn't really notice the details, the little breadcrumbs, he tells you the rest of the story about David or all these other characters. And it has these almost twist endings with the Bible. You're like, I thought I knew this story. And just like he told you right there. And then he finishes his own personal military story and with a similar twist, and you're like, wow, that's crazy. And just some of the connections he makes, like the number of stones that David collected to kill Goliath is the same number of bullets that are in a magazine for a sniper rifle. And he relates David as a sniper because he killed one shot, one kill. That's the motto of a sniper. And he relates it to a sniper story that he experienced as well. And that's just one really kind of intriguing example that all the stories he's got laid out there. And the cover's awesome too, by the way.
And James, to finish up, so the heroes were from the Bible. They're warts and all. The heroes are the men and women that I served with, what I asked them to do and what they laid on the line because I asked them to do it. There's a story in the book where David is with his band of men and he just kind of flippantly says, oh man, I could really go for some of that old water from the well in Bethlehem that I grew up with. Man, it's so nostalgic. The best water I've ever had. Well, a couple of his dudes sneak into Bethlehem through Indian country, through the Philistines, and they get him a pitcher of water. They risk their lives and they come back and they give David this pitcher of water. Like, hey man, look what we got for you. We got you some water from the well of your youth. And David realizes, oh my gosh, I got to be more careful about what I say and how I say it because these men love me and they will risk their lives to get me a drink of water. And he pours it on the ground. And those are things that you go through as a leader. Like you have to be really aware of what your words, how they're being heard. And then as a father, when you're a father, like man, when the tone of your voice, the way you say something, it has such an impact on your kids. And the end product of this that I didn't realize until the second to last, if not the last edition, was the other heroes in there. It's my wife and sons. Like my boys are incredible, loving men. And the way I shortchanged them with being a man of war and where my wife stepped into that gap, like that is heroic. And then the other piece of that too is heroes are all around us, but we aren't necessarily recognizing them. And this goes back to our story of what we're elevating, right? Like pimp this, pimp that, pimp this. What about that quiet homeschool mom who's putting in the extra hours to develop her children? You know what I mean? There's heroism everywhere. And the writing process, I'll share one of the quick stories was I used to leave all the time, and I would leave in the middle of the night because it was just easy. And most of the time we were leaving in the middle of the night anyways, like if either you were flying or whatever. So my wife and I, we would put the boys to bed, and the war started for me heavily in around 2003. So one of my boys was 3, the other one was 5, and it just went from there. So we'd have our last day together where we would play and we'd have a dinner, and it was weird. I tried to keep the tension down, even though I'm going off to war, and I would disappear in the night. And that was that. Well, one day it was the middle of the day, and we drove to work with the boys, and they were in car seats behind us. And from my house to the unit was about 20 miles, and it is on this 2-lane road in the woods. And I'm driving, and my kids are beginning to acknowledge and understand that dad's leaving again. I'm going to have a hard time. They begin to understand that dad's leaving, and they're little boys. They don't really know what war is, but they have an idea. They know enough that I might not be coming back, right? So they're crying in the back of in the truck, and it's killing me, man. It's killing me. And I get to work, and I hug everybody goodbye, and the boys are hugging me, and I'm walking away, and the little boys, and one's got one leg and one's got the other leg, and they're like, "Daddy, don't go. Daddy, don't go." And I'm pulling away, and I almost have to like push them off me. And I walk into work, and I'm just like, I will never do that again. I will leave in the middle of the night if it means sleeping on the side of the road. I will never, ever do that again. And that story stuck with me, James, but it wasn't until I was writing it that I realized, dude, at some point, my boys went through that every time. At some point, maybe it was the next day, maybe it was 2 days, maybe it was 2 weeks later. At some point, they began to realize dad's gone and he's at war, and they had to go through all those emotions, and they had to have their cry. And you know who my wife did that every time. Probably I deployed 15 times. So 15 or 20 times she carried that load for me. I could barely carry it once. And I said, fuck it. I'm never doing that again. And it never, ever dawned on me until I was reading this book, what she carried for me. And I think that's that compelling story. When you do begin to understand that, or believe that there's a God and he sent his son to help you, that personal sacrifice and what he did to carry us is just overwhelming. And we have little snippets of that through our lives. Yeah. So that's just one of those things that was an epiphany for me through the writing that I just never appreciated.
Writing can be good that way, right? It can help you organize your thoughts. It can help you realize what you think at all. And if you're really lucky, it can help you realize what you believe deeply and just never realized, which it sounds like you had more than one of those realizations. That's tough. It's also got to be hard coming to some of those realizations now. How does your family respond to the book? Your wife and your kids, right?
Yeah,
What was it like?
worked. Like Randy was talking about it. I wasn't sure if it was going to work. And I didn't realize, again, you talk about this avatar, who's your target audience? You know what I mean? And it wasn't until my second to last or last edition that I realized I'm writing this to my sons. I'm writing this to my 2 boys so they can understand. And both of them, they're not big readers. Both of them read it in a matter of days. And both of them have come back to me and said, I get it. I get it. My brother, who I was estranged from for years, just last week I talked to him, and he's, look, dude, I get it. I was hurt. I was resentful. I was mad. You had very little to do with me and our sister Jackie and our mom and dad. And I just didn't understand why. So him reading what I went through for 15 years of going back and forth to war and how you have to prioritize my boys first, my wife second, and then everyone else third, fourth, fifth, sixth. It's been really some beautiful healing with it. And I think what I'm hoping is that guys like Randy and other men and women that we've worked with that don't have the time to sit and write, that they can share that book with their kids or with their mom and dad, because they went through the exact same thing as we did. So I really am hoping that it's a healing experience for a bunch of our mates. The dudes that are killing themselves, I still don't fully understand it, but I know part of it is this, part of it is the guilt, part of it is the separation and the resentment that we've created in our own close personal lives. So it's a bit of a love letter to them also. And hey man, share this with your families, and maybe there can be some healing for you emotionally and psychologically and even with your family. And that's a tall ask, man. It really is, but it seems to be working. And it's just unbelievable.
And it's a really awesome book. I'm really proud that Jeff asked me on board and then we got it out. And the funny thing about him realizing it, who it was written for, is that Laura and I asked him like 16 times in the last 2 years, hey man, who are you really writing this for? He's like, I'm writing it for everybody. No, really, who are you writing it for? I'm writing it for all the soldiers. I know I'm writing it for all. It was hard to figure out. And that's something I've learned in my second career, talking to all these authors, especially the nonfiction authors that are writing about their lives, is when we do this, we're digging deep. And it's the only way it's going to be compelling is if we call it, Laura and I call it leaving blood on the paper, by digging in and getting into your feelings and really thinking about why you're writing stuff and why you went through this stuff and thought these things. And you may not figure it out, but hopefully you'll figure it out by the end, and we can go back and tweak it in the right direction so that it's a really compelling story. The end.
It's hard to top that. I got to say, that was a great description of how it.
Yeah, I'll share one last thing, James, because whenever I talk to people, and I love podcasts, because just like writing a book, you guys dig and you get personal, and I always I find something else out that wasn't aware of on the surface. But one of the last group of people, and again, it's funny because again, I know Randy, you told me, everyone tells you need to be very specific. The more specific you are, you hit the bullseye, and it ripples back to everyone else. So one of the other unintended people that I'm writing to is men of our age, because it breaks my heart that we don't finish well. We don't finish strong. Like these heroes that we have often die young. And the reason they're still heroes is because they didn't age and become an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard. Men have a trajectory, again, like David, like Solomon. It's like the longer you live and you're no longer pursuing excellence, and you no longer have that ambition, and you've just acquired, we turn to things that we wouldn't otherwise do. So it's also me imploring men to finish. And one of I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. And if you remember this, when Jesus was crucified, there's a series of things that he said that are recorded. And do you remember again, the Bible's tricky because it's the very last thing he said, or it's the second to last thing. Do you remember at all what was one of the very last things Jesus said when he was on the cross?
I don't remember them in order, but he talked about one of his fellows being next to him in heaven the next day. Let's see.
When he's all done,
okay,
he says, "It is finished."
It's finished.
Remember that? It is finished. Yeah. And in our English translation, we read, "It is finished." Okay. In the Greek word, and he spoke both Greek and Aramaic, and probably much of what he was saying was in both, or at least in Greek for the Romans to understand it too. The word "it is finished" is tetelestai. So when he was hanging on that cross, he didn't say, "It is finished." He said tetelestai. And tetelestai back in that day had a number of different meanings. One was when an artist finished their sculpture or finished the painting, and it was as close to perfect as they could get it. and they would reveal it to the community, they would say, tetelestai. When a carpenter or a builder would build a house or landscape a yard or even build a city and they were done, they would say, tetelestai. When a debtor was cleared of his debt, he would get a piece of paper that had written on it, tetelestai. Your debt is paid in full. So when Jesus is on the cross, not just this English translation of it is finished, we get it. He is finished. He is finished with what he set out to do, but his masterpiece is complete. Our debt is covered. What he came here and set out to do was complete. And then finally, too, when the high priest completed the Passover sacrifices to atone for the sins of all humans, the very last sacrifice, when he was finished with it, he would say tetelestai. So when Jesus said tetelestai, that is being heard by all different communities, really understanding what he meant. And that was a compelling story to someone who was religious, someone who was artistic, someone who was a debtor, and that single word to me is what I want humans to be able to end with. Like when you have your last dying breath, I want to be able to say tetelestai. This was the best I could do. This is my masterpiece. What I set out to do is complete. And maybe any debts that I have left over, they're wiped out and they're clean. And that's the single simple word that I end my book with is tetelestai.
That's an awesome story, Jeff. Let me expand on that. One of my clients he wanted me to help his father write his biography. And he wrote this book called Static Line because he was an 82nd general commander of 82nd, longest of any other general to be in charge of 82nd through Just Cause. So he was in Panama with us and Desert Storm, and he spent 3 years writing it before he came to me. And then we spent another couple of years working on it, and he got it published this year. And he published it on the birthday of the Airborne. And it came out and he was super stoked. We worked on a really good cover, and he went out and he signed it. He went to 82nd at the museum and he was signing copies. He was just so excited. And then we had dinner a couple days after he did the signing. He had dinner with his son, and they were talking about it. I'm just so excited this got done, and I can die in peace now. And he passed away the next day. Tetelestai. I'll tell him that story. He might listen. He listens to the podcast. He might listen to this. Anyway, I think that's a good way to end the podcast too, the episode. Any last things you want to share, Jeff? Or I think we covered just about your whole life and mine.
Yeah, no, James, it was great to get to know you, man. Yeah, I love podcasts. I don't know. I think I live solid because I work from home and I continue to write, and my wife and I are just hanging out. This is my style of sitting at the pub, having a beer, talking with dudes. You know what I mean? Like, I think isn't it? And I think we've done that, right? In cultures past, we would meet down at the pub. And again, that's what I love about the European culture. They still do that in many ways. They meet at the pub and they have a pint and they talk. Americans, we have podcasts instead. So I like it.
It was a pleasure. I really feel like we covered two important and distinct topics, and I think a lot of people are going to be interested in hopefully both of them. And that's an inspiring story, what you're doing. Really great to get to know you as well, Jeff. Thanks.
Thanks, buddy.
All right. Hey, thanks everyone for joining us, and leaving comments if you want to below, and we'll see you next week.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.